The ballroom lights were gold. 200 former classmates stood with champagne glasses, laughing, catching up, pretending 10 years hadn't changed their waistlines or their marriages. Then Vanessa Reyes took the microphone. "I just want to say," she said, smiling at the crowd, "it's so good to see everyone doing so well, except," she turned slowly, dramatically, until her eyes landed on the man standing quietly near the back, hands in his pockets. "Daniel Cole. Still single. Still, whatever it is you do now. Delivery apps, was it?" The room laughed. Someone in the back whispered, "Didn't she leave him when he had nothing?" Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't defend himself. He simply smiled, glanced at his watch, like a man waiting for a phone call he already knew was coming, and said nothing at all. Vanessa didn't know that in 11 minutes, every phone in that room would light up with a business news alert, and her life was about to fall apart in front of everyone who had just laughed at his expense. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to Amazing Folktale, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Hype up the video. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what your local time is in the comments below. I love seeing how these stories connect people from all around the world. Let's get started. 3 weeks before that night, Daniel Cole was exactly where he liked to be, invisible. He sat in a glass office on the 19th floor of a building that didn't have his name on it anywhere. No plaque, no portrait in the lobby, just a small logo, Meridian Freight Systems, the logistics technology company he had built from a laptop in a one-bedroom apartment into a business now quietly valued past the $1 billion mark. Most of his own employees on lower floors had never seen his face. That was on purpose. Daniel had learned the hard way that money changes how people look at you, and not always for the better. He had learned it at 26, when he was broke, exhausted, and watching his marriage collapse under the weight of unpaid bills. Back then, nobody wanted to be near him. Now that he had more zeros in his bank account than he could easily count, he had made a quiet promise to himself. He would never again let people know what he had until he knew what they actually wanted from him. He was not a flashy man. He drove a 5-year-old sedan. He wore the same 3 sweaters in rotation. He ate lunch at his desk, usually a sandwich his assistant picked up without being asked, because she'd learned his habits the way people learn the habits of someone they respect. That assistant was Priya Anand, his chief operating officer now, though she'd started as his first hire when the company was 4 people in a co-working space. Priya was sharp, blunt when she needed to be, and fiercely protective of Daniel. Not because he was her boss, but because she'd watched him build something real out of nothing, and she'd watched what it cost him to get there. "You're actually going to this reunion?" she asked, standing in his doorway with a tablet in hand. "I wasn't going to," Daniel admitted. "Too many people I'd rather not explain myself to." "Well, someone's already explaining you," Priya said, turning the tablet toward him. The reunion committee sent a group email. Guess who RSVP'd as guest of honor, recently engaged to a successful entrepreneur. Daniel read the name twice before it registered. Vanessa. He felt something old and quiet shift in his chest. Not heartbreak anymore, that had healed a long time ago. More like a low static of curiosity. "She remarried years ago," he said. "I thought." "Apparently there's an update," Priya said carefully, watching his face. "You don't have to go." Daniel looked out the window at the city he'd quietly reshaped without anyone knowing his name. He thought about 8 years of building himself back up from nothing, brick by brick, while telling almost no one how far he'd come. He thought about his mother, living modestly in an apartment she believed was subsidized housing, never knowing her son paid for it every month. "No," he said finally, "I think I want to see this for myself." He didn't know yet that the woman who once told him he'd never amount to anything had, for the past year, been quietly watching his company's every move, and that her sudden interest in this reunion had almost nothing to do with nostalgia. Margaret Cole lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, the kind with thin carpet and a radiator that clanked every winter morning like it was clearing its throat. She kept the space spotless. She kept fresh flowers on the kitchen table, even when money was tight, because she said a home without flowers felt like it was giving up. She was 61 years old, a retired schoolteacher, and for 8 years she had believed her rent was covered by a county senior housing subsidy. She thanked the caseworker every year at renewal time. She had no idea the subsidy was her son, quietly wiring the full amount to a property management company every single month, refusing to let her know. Margaret had given her whole life to raising Daniel alone after his father left when he was 9. She'd worked 2 jobs some years. She'd sat up nights helping him with homework at a kitchen table, not unlike the one she had now. She loved him with the fierce, aching love of a woman who had sacrificed everything and would do it again without complaint. But Margaret carried a weight she had never fully told him about, a guilt that lived quietly under her ribs for 8 years. When Daniel's marriage to Vanessa was falling apart, when he was working double shifts trying to keep a failing engineering job and pay off debt from a business idea that hadn't yet worked, Margaret had watched her son come apart at the seams. And in her fear, a mother's fear of watching her only child collapse, she had told him, gently but firmly, that maybe letting Vanessa go was for the best. She never told him the real reason behind that advice. She never told him what she and Vanessa still did, twice a year, over coffee at a small diner 3 towns over, a quiet ritual neither woman had ever mentioned to Daniel. Margaret still kept a shoebox of old letters in her closet, tied with a faded ribbon, that she had never shown her son. Some nights she took the box out, looked at it, and put it back without opening it. She told herself it wasn't the right time. She had been telling herself that for 8 years. Every Sunday, Daniel called her. Every Sunday, she asked him if he was eating enough, if he was seeing anyone, if he was happy. And every Sunday, she said nothing about the box in the closet, or the coffee visits, or the secret she had been carrying since the year everything fell apart. Margaret loved her son with her whole heart. But love and honesty are not always the same thing, and Margaret had let fear choose silence for far too long. Vanessa Reyes had always known how to make a room believe her. At the reunion planning mixer 2 weeks before the main event, she arrived in a designer coat that had cost more than her last mortgage payment, a payment she and her husband Ryan Brooks were now 3 months behind on. She laughed easily, hugged old classmates, complimented everyone's children, and steered every conversation gently toward her own life. Ryan's business is doing incredibly well, she told a cluster of old sorority sisters. We're thinking of expanding to a second office next year. None of it was true. Ryan's real estate brokerage hadn't closed a meaningful deal in 5 months. The second office was a conversation Ryan had once had with a friend over drinks, nothing more. But Vanessa had learned, over the years, that confidence was its own currency, and she spent it freely, even when the account behind it was empty. It hadn't always been this way. Vanessa Reyes, at 24, had been a woman terrified of poverty, the daughter of a mother who'd worked 3 jobs and still lost the family house. When she married Daniel Cole, she believed she was marrying stability. When that stability disappeared during his hardest year, unpaid bills, a failed job, dreams that seemed more like delusions at the time, something in her panicked in a way she never fully explained to anyone, not even herself. She left. She told people at the time that Daniel had changed, that he'd become distant and unreliable. Some of that was even true. But the deeper reason, the fear that had driven her out the door, she buried so deep that even she sometimes forgot it was there. Now small cracks were showing. At the mixer, when Tom Whitfield, the reunion's organizer, mentioned casually that he'd heard some tech company got bought out for millions, run by some guy who went to school with us, Vanessa's smile flickered for half a second before she caught it. Really, she said too lightly. Anyone we know? Tom shrugged. No idea. Some quiet guy, apparently avoids cameras. Vanessa laughed it off. But that night, alone in her car, she opened her email and sent a quiet message to the reunion group thread, addressed to Tom, asking, almost too casually, "Is it true Daniel's company got bought out for millions? I heard a rumor." She didn't realize the thread had accidentally CC'd Daniel himself. She wasn't attacking him out of old resentment anymore. She was testing the water, trying to find out, before anyone else did, exactly how much her ex-husband was worth now, and exactly how much that fact might threaten the version of her life she'd spent 8 years constructing. The email landed in Daniel's inbox on a Tuesday morning, buried in a CC list of 40-some names. Priya spotted it first and forwarded it with a single line. "You need to see this." Daniel read it twice. "Is it true Daniel's company got bought out for millions?" He sat back in his chair, feeling something cold settle in his stomach. 8 years of building a life so quiet that even distant relatives didn't fully understand what he did for a living. And now, out of nowhere, his ex-wife was asking pointed questions in a group thread 3 weeks before they'd be standing in the same room. "She's fishing," Priya said, arms crossed, standing in his doorway. "The question is why?" "Maybe she just heard a rumor," Daniel said, though he didn't fully believe it. "Maybe." Priya said. Or maybe someone told her something and she wants to confirm it before the reunion. Either way, I'd be careful. That evening, restless, Daniel drove to his mother's apartment instead of going home. Margaret answered the door in her reading glasses, delighted and mildly startled. You never visit on weeknights, she said, pulling him into the kitchen, already reaching for the kettle. They talked about small things first, her garden, a book club she'd joined, a leaking faucet the building manager hadn't fixed. Then, almost without meaning to, Daniel asked, Mom, do you ever hear from Vanessa? Margaret's hand paused on the kettle for just a beat too long. Why do you ask? She's going to be at the reunion, apparently engaged again. He shrugged. I don't know, it's been 8 years, and I still feel like there's something I never understood about why she left. Margaret busied herself with mugs, not meeting his eyes. Some things are better left in the past, sweetheart. It was such a small deflection that most sons wouldn't have noticed. But Daniel had spent a career reading people's hesitations for a living, negotiating deals, sensing when a partner was withholding something important. He noticed. Mom, he said gently, is there something you're not telling me? Margaret set the mugs down, her hands trembling slightly. There's a lot of things I've never told you, Daniel. Most of them because I was trying to protect you, or protect myself, from admitting I made mistakes. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for a moment her eyes were wet. Someday I'll tell you everything, I promise. Just, not tonight. Daniel left that evening, with more questions than he'd arrived with. A quiet unease settling over him, that he couldn't yet name. Something was buried in his family's past, something bigger than an old divorce, and for the first time in years, he found himself wanting to dig for it. The following week, Daniel returned to his mother's apartment to fix the leaking faucet himself. A small excuse, really, to see her again, and gently push for answers. While Margaret was in the kitchen, he found himself standing in her bedroom closet, reaching for a light bulb on the top shelf, when his hand brushed against an old shoebox tied with a faded ribbon. He didn't open it. Not yet. But he noticed the way it had clearly been taken down and put back many times, the dust pattern disturbed, the ribbon retied slightly differently than a box that had sat untouched for years. He said nothing to his mother about it, but the unease from the week before deepened into something sharper. 2 days later, at Meridian's downtown office, Priya knocked on his door holding a printed report, routine background vetting the company ran for any major public event where Daniel might appear, a standard security protocol given his growing profile in industry press. You're going to want to sit down for this, she said. The report detailed something unexpected, a LinkedIn profile under a slightly altered name, Vanessa R. instead of Vanessa Reyes, that had been quietly following Meridian Freight Systems' company page, engaging with posts, viewing employee profiles, for over a year. The activity pattern showed consistent, careful monitoring, not the behavior of someone catching up out of curiosity, but someone tracking a company closely, deliberately, for a long time. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. A year, he repeated. She's been watching us for a year? Watching you, Priya corrected quietly. The account's activity spikes every time your name comes up in a press mention, even the ones where you're not pictured. That same week, at a small pre-reunion mixer, Vanessa found a way to accidentally cross paths with Daniel near the drink table. She looked genuinely pleased to see him, her voice softening into something almost nostalgic. Remember our old apartment? She said. The one with the radiator that never worked. We used to sleep in our coats. She laughed, a little too warmly. We had nothing back then, but somehow it felt like enough. Daniel studied her for a moment, the woman who once told him in their final fight that she couldn't keep waiting for a life that might never come. He was polite, distant. He didn't take the bait of nostalgia. It was a long time ago, Vanessa, he said simply, and excused himself. Walking away, he felt the question forming clearly for the first time. Was she trying to humiliate him at the reunion, or was she trying, in her own complicated way, to win something back? Or was there a third possibility neither he nor the viewer had considered yet, something she was protecting, not pursuing? Whatever it was, Daniel now understood one thing clearly. Vanessa's return into his orbit was not a coincidence, and it was not innocent curiosity. It was calculated, and he intended to find out why. Ryan Brooks had never planned to reach out to Daniel Cole directly, but desperation has a way of erasing pride. Sitting in his car outside his failing brokerage office, staring at a stack of unpaid invoices, Ryan finally typed out a message to an email address he'd found through a mutual industry contact, Daniel's assistant's public business line. He didn't mention Vanessa. He didn't mention the reunion. He simply, carefully, asked for 15 minutes of Daniel's time to discuss a potential small business partnership or loan opportunity. Priya flagged the email immediately, recognizing the last name. "Your ex-wife's husband," she told Daniel, sliding the printout across his desk. "He's asking for money, and he clearly has no idea we know exactly who he is." Daniel read the message twice, something twisting uncomfortably in his chest. It was strange, almost surreal. The man his ex-wife had built a new life with, quietly reaching out behind her back, apparently unaware that Daniel already knew far more about their situation than either of them realized. "Should I ignore it?" Priya asked. Daniel thought for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "Set up a call, quietly, just to hear him out." Meanwhile, at home, Vanessa's carefully maintained image was fraying at the seams. She sat across the dinner table from Ryan, candles lit, trying to recreate the picture of stability she performed so well in public, when his phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. He silenced it, but not before Vanessa caught the caller ID. First Coastal Debt Recovery. "What was that?" she asked, her voice suddenly tight. "Nothing," Ryan said too quickly. "Work stuff." But Vanessa had grown up watching her mother field calls exactly like that one, and she recognized the particular flavor of dread on Ryan's face. Later that night, digging through drawers she normally left untouched, she found the truth. Months of missed payments, a business loan on the verge of default, a mortgage quietly slipping behind. The successful entrepreneur she'd been bragging about to old classmates was in reality drowning in the exact same financial fear she had once fled from Daniel to escape. The irony was suffocating. She had left a good man during his hardest year because she couldn't bear the fear of poverty, and 8 years later she had rebuilt her entire identity around a marriage that was hollow in precisely the same way. She didn't cry. Vanessa rarely allowed herself that. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table long after Ryan had gone to bed, staring at the reunion invitation on the counter, and made a decision. She would go to that reunion, and no matter what it took, she would make sure everyone in that room believed her life was exactly as golden as she'd always claimed it was, even if it meant tearing someone else down to do it. 2 days before the reunion, alone in her kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday morning, Vanessa scrolled through her phone while her coffee went cold. A business news alert caught her eye, a regional feature titled Top 40 Under 40, The Builders Changing the Industry. She almost swiped past it. Then a name stopped her thumb cold. Daniel Cole, founder, Meridian Freight Systems. There was a photo, not a grainy, half-recognizable image, a clear professional headshot. Older, sharper around the eyes, but unmistakably him. The article detailed a company valuation that made her hands go numb around the coffee mug. She read it once, then again, then a third time, as if the numbers might change if she looked hard enough. The mug slipped from her fingers and shattered on the tile floor. She didn't move to clean it up. She sat there, coffee spreading slowly across the tile, staring at the photo of the man she had once told, in their final fight, that he would never be anything but broke and stuck. This was the moment, not the reunion, not the microphone, not the laughing crowd. This was the real moment. Everything changed. Vanessa learned the truth about Daniel's success 3 days before she ever opened her mouth to mock him in public. Which meant the humiliation at the reunion hadn't come from ignorance at all. It had come from panic, from calculation, from a woman who suddenly understood that the man she'd dismissed as a failure was now, by every measure that mattered to the people in that ballroom, far more successful than she and Ryan had ever pretended to be, and who realized, in a cold flash of self-preservation, that if she didn't control the story first, someone else would tell it for her. Better to be the woman who mocked the broke ex-husband than the woman exposed as having married one of the most successful men in the room and thrown him away. She hadn't humiliated Daniel out of old resentment, she had done it as a strategy. A performance, staged in advance, to protect an image she could feel slipping through her fingers in every other part of her life. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Daniel, standing at the back of that ballroom checking his watch, wasn't waiting for a phone call about his company at all. He was waiting for something far more personal, and her public mockery hadn't caught him off guard in the slightest. It had simply confirmed everything he already suspected about who she'd become. The night of the reunion, after the laughter in the ballroom died down, and the room moved on to other conversations, Daniel quietly made his way to the open bar, ordered a water, and found Priya waiting near the entrance, phone in hand. "You're taking this well," she said quietly. "I've had 3 days to process it," Daniel admitted. "There's something else," Priya said, lowering her voice. "HR flagged an application 2 months ago for a regional operations role. Applicant used the last name Reyes Brooks. It didn't ring alarm bells until I cross-referenced it just now." She showed him the screen. "It's her. She applied for a job at your company under a slightly different name and got rejected in the standard process before either of you had any idea there was a connection." Daniel stared at the screen for a long moment, something heavy settling in his chest. Vanessa hadn't just been monitoring his success from a distance. She had actually tried, quietly and secretly, to work her way into his company. Likely before she even confirmed it was truly him, chasing a stable paycheck her own household desperately needed. It painted a picture far more complicated than simple cruelty. A woman drowning financially, watching an old rumor turn into confirmed fact, applying for a job out of pure desperation, then standing in front of 200 people 3 weeks later mocking the very man whose company had just rejected her application. Across the room, Vanessa's practiced confidence was cracking in real time. She'd overheard a cluster of old classmates whispering after her speech, not laughing along with her the way she'd expected, but exchanging uneasy glances, checking their phones. The Top 40 Under 40 feature had clearly begun circulating, and Daniel's photo was now attached to numbers that made her mockery, only minutes old, look less like confidence and more like cruelty, aimed at a man who didn't deserve it. Margaret, standing near the edge of the room in a modest navy dress, had watched the entire exchange, with her hand pressed to her chest. She had not expected Vanessa to say those words publicly. She had believed, foolishly perhaps, that whatever secrets sat between them could stay quiet a little longer. But watching her son stand there and absorb public humiliation with quiet dignity, while the truth of both his success and Vanessa's desperation churned invisibly beneath the surface, something in Margaret finally broke loose. 8 years of silence had cost her more sleep than she ever admitted to anyone. She was done protecting secrets that were only causing more damage the longer they stayed buried. She began walking toward Vanessa, her heart pounding, ready to do something she had avoided for 8 long years. Margaret didn't confront Vanessa that night. Not yet. The ballroom was too loud, too public, and some conversations, she believed, deserved privacy even when justice was overdue. Instead, she asked Daniel to come by her apartment the following afternoon. When he arrived, she was sitting at the kitchen table with the shoebox in front of her, ribbon untied for the first time in years. "I think it's time," she said quietly, "that you saw these." Inside were old letters, photographs, a folded newspaper clipping from Daniel's college graduation, and near the bottom, a letter in handwriting Daniel recognized instantly. Vanessa's. It was dated 2 years after their divorce. "Margaret, I know I have no right to ask this, but please don't tell Daniel I wrote to you. I left because I was terrified, not of him, never of him, but of ending up like my mother, broke and alone with nothing to show for it. I know that makes me a coward. I think about him more than I should. There's something about that year you should know, something I never told Daniel. I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to say it myself." Daniel read it twice, his hands unsteady. "She admits she still loved me," he said slowly. "But what does she mean, something I never told me?" Margaret's face went pale. "I should have asked her that years ago," she admitted. "We used to meet for coffee, twice a year. I never told you. I told myself it was harmless, just checking on her, making sure she was all right. But once, maybe 5 years ago, she said something like that to me directly, almost exactly what's in that letter, and I let it go. I was too afraid of what it might mean, so I never pushed." "Afraid of what?" Daniel asked, his voice tightening. Margaret hesitated so long that Daniel thought she might not answer at all. Finally she said, "Daniel, I encouraged you two to separate, back then. I told you it was for the best, that she'd only drag you down while you were trying to rebuild your life. I never told you the real reason I pushed so hard. I was diagnosed with an illness that year, nothing I've ever told you about, because I recovered, and I didn't want you carrying that weight on top of everything else. I was terrified of leaving you unstable, tied to a marriage I thought was failing anyway. I made a choice for you that wasn't mine to make." Daniel sat back, stunned. The letter still in his hand, decades of quiet family history suddenly rearranging itself in front of him. but one question burned louder than any other. "Mom," he said carefully, "what do you think Vanessa never told me?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I think," she said softly, "you need to ask her yourself. And I think, when you do, you should ask about a little girl named Sophia." Daniel found Vanessa 2 days later, not at the reunion after-party where he'd originally planned this conversation, but at a quiet coffee shop near her sister's house, a location Margaret had reluctantly provided. Margaret came too. She had told Vanessa the night before, privately and firmly, "I let you go believing you were only cruel. Tell him the truth, or I will." When Daniel walked in, Vanessa's face went through a visible collapse of composure. The practiced confidence of the reunion completely gone, replaced by something raw and frightened. "I know about the letter," Daniel said quietly, sitting down across from her. "I know you were pregnant when you left." Vanessa's hands trembled around her cup. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she began. "I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks before I left you," she said. "You were working double shifts, drowning in debt, barely sleeping. I was terrified. For the baby, for us, for everything. I told myself I was protecting her by leaving before things got worse. I told myself a lot of things that year to survive." "Her," Daniel repeated. The word landed like a stone in his chest. "Sophia," Vanessa said, tears finally breaking loose. "I gave birth 8 months after I left. I was alone, broke, terrified. My sister had stability, a good job, a home, a husband who wanted kids and couldn't have them. I let her legally adopt Sophia. I told myself it was the right thing, the responsible thing, giving her a life I couldn't give her at the time. I stayed close. I let everyone call me cousin. I told myself I'd fix it eventually, that I'd find the courage to tell you, to make it right. And then years kept passing, and the lie just kept getting heavier, until I didn't know how to put it down anymore." Margaret reached over and took Vanessa's hand, tears in her own eyes. "You told me once you handled it," she said softly. "I always wondered what that meant. I should have asked you years ago instead of letting my own fear keep me quiet too." Daniel sat in stunned silence, doing the math he had already half completed in his head over the past 2 days. Sophia was 7 years old. The timeline lined up exactly. "She's mine," he said, not quite a question. Vanessa nodded, unable to speak. The coffee shop around them continued its ordinary hum, the espresso machine hissing. A couple laughing at a nearby table, completely unaware that at this small corner table, an entire hidden history had just cracked open. A daughter Daniel never knew existed, a secret Margaret had carried in fragments for years, a lie Vanessa had built her entire adult identity around concealing. The truth, once finally spoken, filled the small space between them with something heavier than anger and more complicated than heartbreak. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. 8 years, he said quietly, staring at Vanessa across the table. 8 years, I built a company, rebuilt a life, tried to become someone worth respecting, and the entire time I had a daughter I never knew existed. You let me miss everything, her first steps, her first words, every single day of her life. I know, Vanessa whispered. I know there's nothing I can say that makes that okay. Then don't say anything, Daniel replied, not cruelly, but firmly. Just tell me the truth from here forward. No performances, no managing the story. I need to know exactly where things stand. Legally, practically, all of it. Vanessa nodded, wiping her eyes. My sister adopted her legally, years ago. I never reversed it. I was too ashamed, too scared of losing what little relationship I still had with Sophia if the truth came out. She thinks I'm her cousin. She doesn't know any of this. Margaret, sitting quietly beside them, finally spoke. Daniel, whatever you decide to do, please remember, that little girl has a stable home, a mother who loves her, even if it isn't the mother she was born to. Whatever comes next has to be about what's best for her, not about anyone's guilt or anger. Daniel closed his eyes for a long moment, breathing through a wave of emotion he hadn't expected. Not fury, though there was plenty of reason for it, but something closer to grief for the years already lost, and a fierce, immediate protectiveness for a child he hadn't even met yet. I'm not here to tear anything apart, he said finally. I don't want to take her from the only stability she's ever known, but I am not going to be a stranger to my own daughter for 1 more year. We're going to do this properly, legally, carefully, with a family counselor involved on Sophia's timeline, not mine. But I am going to know my daughter, Vanessa. That part isn't negotiable. Vanessa nodded, something like relief breaking through her guilt. She had braced herself, she admitted quietly, for rage, for lawyers, for a war that would tear the fragile piece of her sister's household apart. She hadn't expected restraint. She hadn't expected, after everything, to be met with something that looked almost like grace. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me," Daniel said, standing to leave. "This isn't for you. This is for her." He walked out of the coffee shop without looking back, leaving Vanessa and Margaret sitting together in a silence that held 8 years of buried truth, finally, painfully, out in the open air. Karma, when it finally arrived for Vanessa, didn't come from Daniel's hand at all. It came the way truth usually does, quietly, inevitably, through the simple erosion of things built on lies. Word travels in social circles the way water finds cracks in a foundation. Within weeks of the reunion, classmates who had once believed Vanessa's stories of a thriving engagement began comparing notes. Someone mentioned the debt collector calls Ryan had been avoiding. Someone else mentioned that the successful entrepreneur hadn't closed a real estate deal in months. The version of Vanessa's life she had spent years carefully constructing began quietly unraveling in group chats and coffee conversations she wasn't part of, without Daniel ever saying a single word publicly about any of it. Ryan, for his part, chose honesty over pretense. Freed from the exhausting performance of a marriage that had already effectively ended, he reached back out to Daniel, not for a loan this time, but simply to thank him for the earlier offer and to admit, with genuine humility, that he wanted a real fresh start, separate from Vanessa, built on something more honest than the image they'd been maintaining. "I should have been honest with her from the beginning," Ryan admitted during their call. "About the money, about everything. Hiding it only made it worse when it finally came out." Daniel respected that kind of honesty more than he expected to. He didn't offer Ryan a loan, but he did offer him something else, a reference to a colleague hiring for an honest entry-level operations role, a real chance to rebuild from steady ground instead of borrowed confidence. Vanessa's punishment, if it could be called that, wasn't public disgrace or financial ruin engineered by anyone seeking revenge. It was simpler and, in its own way, more painful. The slow, humbling process of watching an image she'd spent a decade constructing dissolve under the weight of its own foundation, while the man she'd once mocked in front of 200 people quietly rebuilt his relationship with the daughter she'd kept hidden, without ever needing to say a cruel word about her to anyone. She moved out of the house she and Ryan could no longer afford together. She took a modest apartment near her sister's, closer now to Sophia in the ordinary daily way she'd always claimed to want, but never had the courage to build honestly. She began slowly, the long work of becoming someone her daughter could someday be proud to know as more than cousin. There was no arrest, no public scandal, no villain dragged through the mud for viewers to cheer against, just the quiet, undeniable karma of truth, outliving every lie built to hide it. 6 months later, Daniel Cole sat on a small porch swing outside his sister-in-law's house, waiting. The legal process had been slow and careful, exactly as he'd insisted. Family counselors, supervised visits at first, Sophia's own comfort and timeline placed above everyone else's urgency. It had tested his patience more than any business negotiation ever had. But watching the screen door open now, watching a small girl step out onto the porch with dark, curious eyes and a hesitant smile, Daniel understood immediately that every month of waiting had been worth it. "Hi," Sophia said shyly, holding a stuffed rabbit against her chest. "Mom said you're my dad. Is that true?" Daniel felt his throat tighten. "It's true," he said softly. "I'm really glad to finally meet you, Sophia." She studied him for a long moment with the unguarded honesty only children have. "Do you like rabbits?" she asked. Daniel laughed, something warm breaking loose in his chest for the first time in longer than he could remember. "I love rabbits," he said. "Tell me about yours." Inside the house, Margaret watched through the window, tears sliding freely down her cheeks, tears of guilt finally released, and of joy finally allowed to exist alongside it. She had spent 8 years carrying secrets meant to protect the people she loved, and had learned, the hard way, that protection built on silence often causes the very pain it's trying to prevent. She had finally told Daniel everything: her illness, her fear, her role in encouraging the divorce, her quiet coffee meetings with Vanessa. And instead of the anger she'd braced herself for, she had received something she hadn't expected. Her son's hand in hers, and the words, "You were scared, Mom. I understand fear. I just wish you'd trusted me enough to be scared together." Vanessa, watching from the doorway, kept her distance that afternoon, giving Daniel and Sophia the space to build something new without her shadow over it. She was rebuilding her own life now, slowly, honestly, no performances, no borrowed confidence, just the quiet daily work of becoming someone worth trusting again. It would take years, she knew. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't running from the truth. She was finally standing still long enough to face it. That evening, driving home with the porch light fading in his rearview mirror, Daniel thought about the reunion 6 months earlier. The laughter, the microphone, the mockery he'd absorbed without flinching. He thought about how badly he'd once wanted his success to be a kind of quiet revenge, proof that he'd become someone worth respecting despite everyone who doubted him. But sitting on that porch swing with his daughter, listening to her explain, in great and serious detail, exactly why her stuffed rabbit's name was Butterscotch, Daniel realized the billionaire moment he'd been building toward his whole life had never really been about the money at all. It had been about this: a daughter's trust, a mother's honesty, a truth finally strong enough to outlast every lie that had tried to bury it. I used to think the money would be my revenge, Daniel said quietly to himself, smiling into the darkening road ahead. Turns out the truth was.
Moral of the story: the story's lesson is that character, honesty, and kindness, not money or social level, define real achievement. Daniel never pursued retaliation against people that upset him. Instead, he kept modest, put forth effort, and let his acts to be more powerful than words. His dignity and patience showed that those who judge others according to fleeting mistakes usually come to lament their choices afterward. Fear, pride, and the need to keep a false front guided Vanessa's decisions, but ultimately the truth revealed every lie. The story also shows how deeply painful keeping significant secrets can be, even when they are intended to shield someone. While dishonesty just causes more pain, forgiveness and honesty have the ability to heal damaged relationships. Most significantly, we ought never to dismiss anybody since events could change. Respect people for who they are, help them during trying circumstances, and keep in mind that honesty, love, and truth surpass wealth or achievement in importance.